So how are you guys doing today in this beautiful weather?
Oh, it's typical UK weather. We're in the Prism yard with all the other Prismers, and we've got permission to protest in the Prism yard for the next hour or two. And we've asked our masters if we're warning our masters that we're going to another world as possible, but they're like, yeah, you're in the Prism yard, dude.
I never knew that you had to, I mean, they're starting to implement it in the States where you need permission, but I never knew that was the basic framework that was working out here. That's really just, not freedom of press if you have to, and freedom of speech if you have to ask permission to have speech at all.
The UK doesn't have a constitution. Remember, they have a monarchy, a kingdom. It's a kingdom. And I think it's like if more than two people are gathering. I don't know for sure the law here, but I know, it started around that Hawes guy, that guy who was protesting in Parliament Square. But and also there's a misconception about the UK that Speaker's Corner, that there's free speech there. There actually isn't. You can be arrested there if you say the wrong thing. I
know. Yeah, even in the free speech zone in Bilderberg, there's like, if you say anything wrong, we can't arrest you. If you use violent language or even curse, which is pretty insane, pretty bitchy. Well, what's your take on the protest here? What do you think about it? What kind of conversations have you been having, and how do you assess it?
It's another one of the classic European sort of protests. So you have a lot of environmentalists, no fracking, down with capitalism, communist flags, a lot of Chinese communist flags flying around, socialism. And of course that turns off a lot of people who will be watching the mainstream media presentation of this. But also I wonder if they realize that what we have now is not capitalism by any stretch of the imagination. It's very close to what the Soviet Union had in terms of the Soviet Union claimed they were communist, but they weren't. They were gangster capitalist, where state-backed industries controlled certain things.
Very, very well put. I very much agree with the same thing. We got Max
Keiser
here helping me out here with the Union jacket on there.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll be fine over here. What's your assessment of everything happening here?
Well, the social contract is breaking down. What is the social contract? Different people have different interpretations. One interpretation would be that you've got the private space, which are private corporations and private estates, versus the public space, the public good, the public thoroughfare, the public right to express themselves. And it's always been a tension between these two, going back hundreds of years, going back to the Enlightenment. How do you juggle the interests of the monarchy with the interests of a free people? And we've had periods where there's been a good balance, but we're in a period right now where that balance is breaking down completely. In the private space, the corporate space, the military industrial space is completely encroaching the public space, the common domain. So everything is being really whittled down into this, what Stacy calls the Prism yard. So we're really living in an open air prison. And you see examples of that in some countries where it is quite literally, without any shadow of a doubt, an open air prism. You see this in Palestine, for example. But now you see other areas like here in Northern Ireland, the gathering is really an open air prism to a large degree. So the social contract is completely breaking down, and that's what people need to take a look at. Of course, John Locke famously said, when the social contract breaks, the people must revolt. Now, is this the revolt he had in mind? We'll see. I think there's going to be some kind of revolt taking some kind of shape, and we'll see where that goes. But we're at the point where the social contract now is gone. So it's open season because these two sides are completely out of balance.
I remember overhearing a comment. You were talking about the winning side, that there is some kind of sides. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, people ask me, why am I out here and not with the stockbrokers? Because I grew up as a stockbroker, more or less. As a contrarian, I believe that the paper assets of the stockbrokers are going to lose. And I just saw something this week which was confirmation of my thought, which 10,000 Chinese people lining up to buy physical gold. That tells me that the physical assets, gold, silver, and Bitcoin, are going to win against the paper assets. So I want to be on the winning side. I mean, I'm not necessarily purely doing this for reasons of humanitarian purposes. I like to be on the winning side, and I think the physical asset side this is closer to that side than what they're doing in a G8 conference. The G8 conference is about increasing the bonds, selling more bonds, more privatization, more private equity. That's all paper, Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheming, which is really breaking down now. And so I think this will end up being the winning side in that context.
Now, gold and Bitcoin have both taken a slump recently. What do you attribute that to, and do you see a recovery happening soon or later down the line?
In the case of gold, a lot of the price is determined by futures markets. In the paper market, for example, there's an exchange-traded fund which has the symbol of GLD on the New York Stock Exchange. A lot of money is selling out of the paper gold and buying physical gold, so it's a transition into the physical gold. And there's a lot of misinformation, like George Soros has been just talked about as somebody who's been selling his gold, but a lot of people don't also report that he's been selling his GLD, the paper gold, and buying the physical and buying shares in mining stocks. So he's actually increased his bet on gold. Again, he's an opportunist who's not really in it for taking a political side. He's just looking at where he can return the greatest amount on his investments. Yeah. So there's a lot of misinformation. So that would account for part of the slump in gold, is that the paper market is cracking. The physical market is growing, and there's a ceiling to the physical market, which is held down by this paper market. Because remember, in the silver market, for example, it takes 50 times more buy orders to equal a $1 move up than it does to create a $1 move down. That gives you an idea of how this market is tilted using Prism, using the NSA, using the insider traders, using manipulation to make it very difficult for price upticks to occur. But that is cracking, and then you'll see this gap to much higher prices. And then a lot of people will be kicking themselves because they're not there, they're not positioned well for it.
Yeah, they didn't buy it when it was lower. I was really fascinated, hearing about Soros buying so much gold, and I was wondering, what's happening, what's going on. But he is an opportunist. He does want to benefit as much as he can economically. Do you think people are, because in the early 1900s there was a lot of gold confiscation that took place by the U.S. government. Do you think that's a possibility? A lot of people who are selling gold are saying no, that's not a possibility. But can that happen?
Yes, I think it can happen. It can happen in a couple of ways. Either there's physical confiscation, or there is taxing. There could be a tax rate applied to gold or silver of 90% or higher, which would be the equivalent of a confiscation of gold and silver. That's where Bitcoin comes in very handily, because you can park gold holdings, so to speak, in the Bitcoin position. You can move that to another country, another territory. You can translate that back into gold. And so Bitcoin is really fleshing out the ability for gold and silver owners to move money, to get around the state's propensity to attack real value and real money whenever their paper pyramid schemes come under attack. So it's a real threat for sure. But so there's ways to deal with it, though.
Yeah. No one wants their paper fiat money, but you could have.
Here in Northern Ireland is a great example, because as you pointed out yourself, I was with Luke, and he said, I've been robbed. I went to the cash machine and they gave me bogus paper nonsense money. But I said, no, Luke, this is the way the paper money looks in North Ireland. The fact is that same thing in Scotland. They have a different version of the same paper money. If you go back to London and try to spend Scottish money or Northern Ireland paper money, they don't have to take it. It tells you how spurious the value is of paper money. It's a symbolic representation of an exchange medium, but it has no intrinsic value whatsoever. And you had a good lesson in that, Luke, yourself, is that it's an illusion. It's a masked illusion to say that a Northern Ireland pound has intrinsic value. It's only valuable if somebody takes it. And if you go try to spend that down in London, 9 times out of 10, people say, I don't want that. That's not real money. That's not a British pound.
Now, if we all start taking alternative currencies like Bitcoin and silver, I think that may lead to a big shift in the economy. But ultimately, my last question, what are the hopes? What are the goals of that alternative currency? What do you think we could accomplish with that?
I think that the alternative currencies won't really come into their own until you have a collapse in the bond market, the ultimate global pyramid scheme, which we've been saying on your show and InfoWars and our show, that the bond market is trading at a 300-year high in the UK, 238-year high in America. And only with that bond crisis will it become clear that these alternative currencies are a way to escape the carnage of the bond market. The last time we had a big sell-off in the bond market was 1994. interest rates went from roughly 6% to 8%, and you had a 25% collapse in the value of bonds. Now interest rates are 2%, and I think they could easily go to 4 or 5%. That, on a percentage basis, that's a lot bigger move than even in 1994. So you're talking about bond values dropping by 60, 70, 80%, which of course means that every major bank in the world has to declare themselves insolvent, which means that every central bank in the world will have to move to a $100 trillion bailout lending mechanism, facility, and that'll be the move of gold to $10,000 an ounce. Now, look at the news. You see this is happening right now. The smartest minds in the world are saying these bonds are cooked. We've had it. The rally is over. The long-awaited bond apocalypse is happening, and I think it is happening in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. It's happening now.
Thank you so much, Max and Stacy. Thank you for the umbrella.
We are changed.
Really appreciate it.
We are changed. We are changed.
Thank you.
By the way, the Prism yard is private. It's a private Prism because our friend, an artist, was selling his NSA T-shirts with art, NSA art, and they sent a takedown notice this morning to Zazzle to take it down.
A copyright notice?
Yeah.
Infringement notice?
On NSA, which suggests it's a private corporation.
They're acting like Disney. Why don't Americans deserve the right to privacy?
Americans do have the right to privacy.
But not if the NSA listens into every single conversation we have and records it. That's
simply not true.
How can the American public trust you when you engineered and kept secret the largest bailout in the history of the world?
We're not answering.
Let go of my mic. Don't grab my mic. You engineered the largest crisis.
Sir, we're not answering questions.
Constitution. Remember, they have a monarchy, a kingdom. It's a kingdom, and I think it's like if more than 2 people are gathering. I don't know for sure the law here, but I know it started around that Hawes guy, that guy who was protesting in Parliament Square. But and also there's a misconception about the UK that Speaker's Corner, that there's free speech there. There actually isn't. You can be arrested there if you say the wrong thing.
I know. Yeah, even in the free speech zone in Bilderberg, there's like if you say. So how you guys doing today in this beautiful weather?
Oh, it's typical UK weather. We're in the Prism yard with all the other Prismers, and we've got permission to protest in the Prism yard for the next hour or 2. Yeah. And we've asked our masters if we're warning our masters that we're going to another world is possible, but they're like, yeah, you're in the Prism yard, dude.
I never knew that you had to, I mean, they're starting to implement it in the States where you need permission, but I never knew that was the basic framework that was working on here. That's really just, not freedom of press if you have to, and freedom of speech if you have to ask permission to have speech at all.
The UK doesn't have